Before we begin the video, if you enjoy what I'm doing here on High Americana, please head on over to Patreon, linked down below, to help support the channel, where you can also request content to be made. At $3,000 a month, this will become a full-time job. Thank you very much. And now, a passage from A History of Kentucky by Elizabeth Shelby Kinkead, from Chapter 7, The Spanish Conspiracy, 1786 to 1788. The southern territory of the United States extended to the 31st degree of latitude. Below this line, the Spanish still held the dominion they had exercised since the discovery of the continent. In 1513, Ponce de Leon landed on the southeastern coast and claimed in the name of the Spanish king a region of indefinite extent to which he gave the name of Florida. Here he had planted a short-lived colony composed of men who had come to drink of the fabulous fountain of immortal youth. Through this region, the intrepid and ambitious De Soto had led his deluded followers in their hopeless search for gold, only to find his grave in the Mississippi River. Here the Huguenots had sought refuge from religious persecutions in France, and here Menendez had established the first permanent Spanish colony at St. Augustine in 1565, years before the English had settled at Jamestown or the Pilgrim Fathers had landed at Plymouth. It was a land of warmth and beauty, of luxuriant vegetation, of stagnating civilization. Soon the vigorous Americans were to drive out their weaker neighbors, but not before the Spanish king had made an adroit effort to hold and increase his dominions in the New World. Spanish possessions lay on both sides of the Mississippi River. The United States demanded the right to navigate that river. Spain refused to concede this privilege. John Jay of New York, Secretary for Foreign Affairs, was most anxious to conclude a treaty with Spain. Furthermore, he was ignorant of the great growth of the western country, as Kentucky and the neighboring region was then called. In the summer of 1786, he went before Congress and proposed a project which he hoped would bring about the desired treaty. It was this: that the United States should agree to forbear to navigate the Mississippi below the southern boundary for 20 or 30 years. To this, the 7 northern states voted in the affirmative, the 6 southern states in the negative, and Virginia immediately passed resolutions in opposition to the proposition. It required the concurrence of 9 states to carry such a motion. Nevertheless, Mr. Jay, acting upon the decision of the majority, made his proposition to Gardaquis, the Spanish minister, but it was rejected with scorn. These transactions took place in faraway New York. There were only a few citizens in Kentucky who knew of them shortly after their occurrence. Most of the people were in ignorance of the truth concerning them. The action of Congress was misrepresented. Already, Wilkinson had done much to inflame the people against the federal government. Excitement in the district was rising to a high degree. There was no other way of transportation except by water. Kentucky's present and future prosperity seemed to depend upon her being able to carry her products on the Ohio River into the Mississippi and thus to the markets of the world. It was a subject of vital importance. A meeting of citizens was held at Danville in May 1787 to discuss the navigation question. In the early summer, Wilkinson gathered together all the tobacco and other products he could buy and went to New Orleans, ostensibly on a trading expedition. His real object, however, was to offer his services to Spain in order to restore his now reduced fortune. If he failed in this effort, his intention was to turn to England for the same purpose. At New Orleans, an order was given to seize his cargo, but the cunning general sought an interview with Miro, the Spanish governor of the province. He explained his visit. Then he was treated with the utmost courtesy. He was allowed to sell his goods, for which a high price was paid, and permission was granted to him to ship goods to New Orleans for sale. The evidence goes to prove that then and there Wilkinson sold himself to Spain. He bound himself to use all the influence in his power, and that influence was great, to obtain the separation of Kentucky from the United States, and then to deliver the district thus separated into the hands of His Majesty, the King of Spain, to become a province of that power. All privileges of trade were granted to Wilkinson in order that he might prove to the people of Kentucky the advantages they would obtain by becoming Spanish subjects. A large sum of money was now advanced to him, and in the following February he returned to Lexington to display the success of his trading venture in a carriage drawn by 4 horses and accompanied by slaves as attendants. He gave brilliant balls, and the young people danced and praised the gallant host. He gave fine dinners, and in the midst of the good cheer and flashing conversation, the older men applauded the captivating politician. In the meantime, a most notable undertaking had been accomplished. On the 18th day of August, 1787, John and Fielding Bradford issued at Lexington the first newspaper published in Kentucky and the second west of the Alleghanies, to which they gave the name Kentucky Gazette. Accustomed as we are to a multiplicity of journals containing a wide range of information, it is hard for us to realize the general satisfaction and rejoicing occasioned by the appearance of this meager, quaint little sheet, still reverently preserved in the public library at Lexington. During Wilkinson's absence, the Fifth Convention assembled September 17, 1787. It held a quiet session and adjourned submissive to the Act of Virginia after having prepared a petition to Congress in which the 31st of December 1788 was fixed upon as the time when the authority of Virginia over Kentucky should terminate. The people of the district were now informed of the proceedings of the convention through the columns of the Gazette. John Brown was commissioned to present to Congress Kentucky's application for admission into the Confederation of States, by which name the 13 original colonies were at first called. John Brown, the son of a Presbyterian clergyman of Augusta County, Virginia, had come to Kentucky in 1783, the year which brought over so many men who acted important parts in the public affairs of the period. He had been a member from the district in the Virginia Senate, and was now going to take his seat in Congress, to which he had just been appointed. Unfortunately, no quorum in Congress was obtained until late in January 1788. Kentucky's application was not presented until the 29th of February. From the opening of Congress, the absorbing interest had been the question of the adoption of the new federal Constitution, which had recently been prepared and offered to the several states to be voted upon. It was a topic of deep importance. If this Constitution were adopted, its supporters wisely foresaw a new, strong union would be established in place of the old, weak Confederation then existing. No attention was paid to Kentucky's application until the end of May. While Congress was slowly considering this all-important matter for Kentucky, news was received that New Hampshire had voted in favor of the Constitution. 9 states, enough to cause its adoption, were now secured, and Virginia was soon to add her ratification. Of the Kentucky delegates in the Virginia Assembly, only 3 voted in the affirmative. They were Robert Breckinridge, Rice Bullock, and Humphrey Marshall. In Kentucky, the new Constitution did not meet with hearty acceptance. This fact was due to a misapprehension of the situation. The people were afraid that if a stronger central government were established, their right to the navigation of the Mississippi would be bartered away in order to secure a treaty with Spain. The different points contained in it were freely discussed night after night at the meetings of the political club, an organization that was founded in Danville in 1786 and existed until 1790. Many of the prominent citizens of the neighborhood were members of the club, and matters of vital interest to the district were considered by them with an ability that proves the Kentuckians of that time to have been a remarkable people. The minutes of the club, which were carefully preserved by the Secretary Thomas Speed, have recently been published. As the new Constitution was now adopted, the Congress of the old Confederation, then in session, resolved that it had no authority to act upon the application of Kentucky. It was therefore referred to the consideration of the new government. The resolutions were conveyed to the 6th Convention, assembled at Danville, July 28, 1788. About the same time, a letter was received by Judge Samuel McDowell, the president of the convention, from John Brown, the congressman, which contained information concerning the act of Congress and also an account of an interview Brown had with Gardaquis, the Spanish minister. In this conversation, the Spaniard had stated that if the people of Kentucky would erect themselves into an independent state and appoint a proper person to negotiate with him, he had authority for that purpose and would enter into an arrangement with them for the exportation of their produce to New Orleans on terms of mutual advantage. It is not surprising that the acts of Congress created the utmost disappointment in Kentucky after the tedious, now useless efforts which had been made to obtain independence. They did more. They heightened the resentment of some of the people and increased their doubt of the good disposition of the central government toward them. The northern states had been indifferent to the welfare of the western country, and there were many disinterested though unwise men in Kentucky who were exasperated at the slow action of Congress in their affairs. Recognizing the necessity of the districts becoming an independent state and the value of the permission to navigate the Mississippi River, they were willing to resort to revolutionary means in order to obtain these advantages. But there were others who had no thought of the good of the community and acted solely from selfish interest. Whatever conflicting views may be held regarding the motives of some during this most confusing period, there can be no doubt of the falsity of Wilkinson and Sebastian. They are self-convicted. There was another class to whom too much honor cannot be given, those who, in the midst of the excited passions of the time, remained loyal to the government of the United States. The two former classes belonged to the court party, the latter to the country party. Still, that controlling spirit of wise moderation which has been pointed out in the second chapter of this period held the convention back from any rash act. However, as an outgrowth of the prevailing excitement, it called for the election of delegates to a seventh convention who should be empowered to do and accomplish whatever, on a consideration of the state of the district, may, in their opinion, promote its interest. Now was Wilkinson's opportunity to lead the people to believe that it would promote their interests, to become Spanish subjects. But like all schemers, he worked slyly, never openly. Before the election of delegates to the Seventh Convention, George Mooter, Chief Justice of the District, published in the Gazette an address to the people. He proved that they had no authority to act for themselves independently of Virginia, and that by so doing they would be guilty of treason. He pointed out the evident meaning of the resolution of the late convention. He showed that it clearly gave to the delegates of the next convention power to treat with Spain to obtain the navigation of the Mississippi. He proved that such action would be contrary to the federal constitution, and he therefore suggested to the people of Fayette County that they should instruct their next delegates not to agree to frame a constitution and form of government without first obtaining the consent of the Virginia legislature, and not to make any application for the navigation of the Mississippi other than to the legislature of Virginia or to the Congress of the United States. This had the desired effect. The contest in the other counties was quiet, but in Fayette it was attended by great excitement. As usual, the election lasted 5 days. It became evident that the country party was going to be completely victorious. The ever-adroit Wilkinson, one of the candidates of the court party, perceived the situation and promptly announced that he would be guided in voting in the convention by the wishes of his constituents. This promise and his great popularity secured his election, while his associates were defeated. The other 4 delegates chosen were John Allen, Colonel Joseph Crockett, Colonel Thomas Marshall, and Judge Mooter. The Seventh Convention assembled November 4, 1788. The most vital question in the life of Kentucky was about to be decided: whether she should determine to submit to the recent act of Congress and take the necessary legal steps to obtain her separation from Virginia and admittance into the Union, or whether she should determine to separate herself illegally from Virginia and erect herself into an independent state. If the latter course were followed, the Spanish government had a good chance to obtain control of Kentucky. The forces in the convention were drawn up against each other. Let it not be supposed, however, that all those who favored violent separation from Virginia knew of or sympathized with Wilkinson's scheme to make Kentucky a Spanish province. At the outset, a discussion arose as to the power which the convention possessed. The court party contended that it had all power necessary to frame a constitution, to declare the district independent, etc. The country party, on the contrary, strongly opposed every argument of this nature. Upon the day following this discussion, Wilkinson made a speech before the convention. He dwelt feelingly upon the dangers of Indian hostilities, and described brilliantly the advantages of the navigation of the Mississippi River, and pointed out the inability of Congress to obtain for Kentucky this benefit. He openly advocated the violent separation of Kentucky from Virginia, but he only hinted at his real scheme to deliver Kentucky when thus separated into the hands of the Spanish government. And all the while he watched the faces of his hearers to see what effect his adroit suggestions would have upon them. If he discovered satisfaction on their countenances, he would go further and declare his plan. If he discovered disapproval, he had not committed himself in words, and he could yet retreat. The majority of the convention were not only indisposed to listen to any overtures from Spain, but they were decidedly loyal to the government of the United States and opposed to an illegal separation from Virginia. Wilkinson misunderstood the Kentuckians. They applauded his showy oratory, but they were independent in action and staunch in principle. They were thoroughly aroused to an appreciation of the dangers which might arise from their dependent position, and of the fatal results of the Mississippi being closed to them, and yet they nobly resisted the temptation of benefits offered to them by Spain, and remained loyal to the country for which they had fought and had been ready to give their lives. In the revulsion of feeling created by the sentiments thus boldly advocated by Wilkinson, a resolution offered by John Edwards and seconded by Thomas Marshall was agreed to, which proved to be the turning point in the contest. The resolution provided for the appointment of a committee to draw up a decent and respectful address to the people of Virginia for obtaining the independence of the District of Kentucky, agreeable to the late resolutions and recommendations of Congress. But even after this decisive indication of the loyal feeling of the convention had been given, other efforts were made by the opposite faction to carry their object. Before the decent and respectful address was accepted, Wilkinson offered a resolution that a committee be appointed to draft an address to the good people of the district, urging them to furnish the convention at its next session with instruction how to proceed in this important subject of an independent government. This resolution was adopted, greatly to the fears of the party opposing illegal separation, whereupon Colonel Crockett, lately an officer of the Revolution and a staunch adherent to the Union, left the convention and hastened to Fayette County. He returned in 2 days, having obtained the signatures of several hundred citizens who were opposed to an illegal separation. Wilkinson, who had given his promise to be guided by the will of his constituents, was obliged to submit. Patriotism carried the day, the address to the Virginia Assembly was accepted, and the convention adjourned to meet again the following July. This was the crisis in the life of Kentucky. It has been dwelt upon thus at length because no other event in her history so clearly reveals the character of the people. Let everyone who studies this subject learn that in the midst of high excitement, the Kentuckians acted deliberately and soberly. In the midst of strong temptations, they acted wisely and patriotically. Let him also learn that in Kentucky every individual has weight. Although Wilkinson did not abandon his scheme to separate Kentucky from the United States, and although his friend Sebastian after this received a pension from Spain for his efforts in that work, yet there was no further danger that Kentucky would become disloyal to the Union.